Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and this is the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast, which is part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network. Max the Dog and I are coming to you from deep inside the Jam Bunker here in lovely Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today on the show, Eddy Boudel Tan, who is the author of The Rebellious Tide. And let me just tell you, we had a lovely conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. And I really can't wait to read his book either. Which always happens when I interview authors. I get very excited and just want to go immediately read what they've written. Eddy is the author of the novels After Elias and The Rebellious Tide. He's been selected as a 2021 Rising Star by the Writers Trust of Canada and a finalist for the Edmund White Award. His stories can also be found in Joyland, Yolk, Gertrude Press, and G&LR. And he lives with his husband in Vancouver. And if you've ever wanted to have a conversation about Vancouver, you're going to listen to one today because I have a lot of friends that live up there. So over the last few years, I've been hearing a lot about what's been going on up there. So we have a long discussion about real estate and art and the ways in which cities grow. Before we get to that, a little bit of business. So the Jam comes out every Wednesday, and these video podcasts come out about every Monday and Friday. A couple things you can do to help us out. First, tell your friends about us. That is how we spread the word. That is the best way for this podcast to grow. Second, you can leave us reviews. So if you use Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a written review and a star review there. Those are super important for us. If you don't use Apple Podcasts or you're not using an Apple device, you can head on over to our Facebook page and leave us a review there. It's a little bit weird. It's up in the left corner, but that is how we get found. That is how other people find us. So it'd be a great help if you could do that. You can also head over to thewritersjam.com and leave us a testimonial through the webpage that we can use in various marketing things. While you're at the site, a couple things you can do. If you're looking for books, we have book reviews. If you're looking to buy those books, click on that bookshop link up there. You'll support local and independent bookstores across the country. Get that book mailed right to you. You can also sign up for our newsletter. You can get book recommendation reviews, basically all the stuff that we do here sent to you once a month. You don't have to do anything but open your email. You can also support everybody on the Solid Listen Podcast Network. All you got to do, click on that Patreon button for a couple bucks a month, get free episodes, bonus content from everybody, lots of goodies. So, one of the reasons I started this video series, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go, because the long form that we do, we have an hour. We can talk to people about their lives. And so you really get to delve in and figure out what makes them work and the things that sort of shape them as writers. And that helps you sort of understand what you're doing. In the short form, you got 15, 20 minutes. So I wasn't always sure how that was going to go, but I will tell you, we're about 30, 35 interviews in. You haven't seen all of those yet, but we've done them. And I have found it to be equally delightful. And this conversation with Eddy is, I think, maybe one of the best illustrations of that, because we talked about the book, we talked about life, we talked about the sort of thematic things that come out of there and how those are shaped by the questions that writers have. And he's just a delightful person, and it's everything that I wanted this video podcast to be. So I think you're really going to enjoy this today. So I appreciate you stopping by the bunker, spending some time with Max and I hope that your day is going well. Hope you're taking care of yourself. I hope that you were taking care of each other. And I hope that you will sit back for the next 30, 35 minutes and enjoy my conversation with Eddy Boudel Tan.
Yeah. So the Sidewalk Supper Project, I call it a community initiative. So I live in Vancouver, and we have a homelessness crisis here in the city. Yeah. And I don't use that word lightly. So the Sidewalk Supper Project is really something that my best friend and I started to, connect better with people who are unhoused. So our goal, our mission isn't to eradicate hunger or anything like that. Our ambitions are a bit more humble. But what we really want to do is we want to share our love for good food and conversation with people living on the streets. So that's what we've been doing. We quite literally just get together in one of our kitchens and we whip up some food, like a good home cooked meal, really hearty, delicious stuff. And then we just bring it out on the streets. Often we'll sit down with people that we meet and have a good conversation over food. That's really what it's all about. And we've learned so much just through the experience.
Here's why I ask. I lived in Berkeley for 5 years, and it was back when Berkeley allowed homelessness. And so you would get to know the people literally in your block and neighborhood. And there was 2 or 3 people that slept in the business areas right in front of my apartment. And a couple times a month, I would bring them into the house and we would eat in my house, and I'd let them shower and do that like it was like for like 2 years. That was just the thing. And it was weird. It was sort of the Berkeley culture that you just sort of did that, right? Like everybody deserved a humanity.
100%. That's awesome. And I love to hear that you did that. And that's part of our mission, right? Like our goal is to, like, if people were to come across what we were doing and leave with a lesson or a message, it's really about the fact that anyone can do anything to better our communities and our world. So, even if it's something small, identify one thing that you could do that could give back to the world and humanity at large, and do it. And for us, that was food, but for you or someone else, it might be inviting them into your home, or it might be, I don't know, just saying a kind word, or it could be anything really.
Yeah. And I think I'm substantially older than you, but like that's the most Gen X thing that I've heard, right? Which is that I can't change everything. What I can do is change this thing in front of me at this moment and this time. Like, I don't know what is going to happen, but like, that's what I can make that choice to do this.
Exactly. Amen.
So I saw that and I'm like, oh shit, like I'm always really interested in the ways people approach, their life outside of writing and the things that are important and all of that kind of stuff. And I have a bunch of friends in Vancouver who have talked about the housing crunch over the last 10 years as it's become a destination for people and other, to come and live and buy a property. Is like, are you from there?
Yeah, born and raised here in Vancouver.
So
I'm a West Coast
that
boy. Oh, I've seen it. Yes. So it certainly has been a huge issue here in the city, as it has been in a lot of cities, I think. Right, like the affordability. You'll see people who have been long-term residents being pushed out of their own communities because developers are going in and redeveloping and jacking up the property values. But then you also have people who bought a home for $50,000 back in the 70s who are now selling them for $5 million. Like it's a bit of a wild west real estate situation. It's cooling down a little bit, but the victims of that are the people who are living paycheck by paycheck, who are just one paycheck away from not having shelter, and then the unhoused community that doesn't have access to shelter or food.
Yeah, I mean, and I lived in San Francisco during the boom. I lived in Austin right before all that stuff happened. I visited Seattle and Portland, and it is places that tend to be creative, I feel like, are what attract those things, because it's what makes those cities so vibrant is the artists. And then all of a sudden, the business parks show up and you're like, oh, none of us can afford to live here anymore.
Exactly. We see this cyclically just in neighborhoods in the city. And I'm sure this is similar in other cities where, the artists, the creative types, the entrepreneurs, they're drawn to certain areas because of that energy, but also the affordability. They are able to afford to live there and create their art and start a new business. But then the area becomes hot, it becomes cool, that it catches the attention of developers, and then they move in and they push the artists and the entrepreneurs out. It's really crazy.
I mean, it's weird. Like, I don't, I try not to buy into the mythologies of artists. Like, I've been a writer my whole life, and most of the places that I've lived have always been, for lack of, we'll call them up and coming places, right? Like, I can't live in a finished place and create stuff. I need things to be a little bit in flux for me to have that sort of energy that comes with those places. And so it is the irony of that. I don't know if you feel that way, but like, I feel like you see all those artists congregate, not only because it's affordable, but also because it's a fucking palette, right? Like, this is a place to make something.
100%. Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, we are drawn to those areas, right, because of the energy, something that's really ineffable. And a lot of these newer neighborhoods, sure, they're beautiful aesthetically, but everything is just so engineered and sanitized, and that's counter to everything that we as artists look for.
Right? Yeah, it's done. I look at it and I'm like, done. I'm like, well, there's nothing else to do here. Like, the only thing we can do is ruin it. And I don't have enough money to take care of this, so I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, you and I both.
You and we're going to get to the book, but like, the other thing you do is travel. Like, I've traveled a ton all over the place. You've traveled to more countries. Like, what was it that drew you into that? Because that kind of nomadic life takes a mentality.
Yeah. I've always been a passionate traveler. Even when I was a kid, I would read travel books and I would just dream about traveling. So I think it first started partway through my post-secondary education. I took a year, kind of like a gap year. It was meant to be a gap year just to travel. And I wanted to go backpacking. So I went backpacking. And then what was meant to be a year ended up being closer to 4 years, where I just couldn't stop. Like I couldn't imagine going back home and sitting in a classroom and doing adult stuff. So yeah, and from that point onwards, it really just opened my eyes. It might be a bit of a cliche nowadays, but I honestly think that I learned far more traveling the world than I ever did in a classroom or a formal environment. And what really draws me to traveling is just meeting different people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and seeing like how different they are and how different they live their lives, but also how similar they are, right? Yeah. We are all way more similar than we are different. And that's something that has been really just illuminating across all the places that I've traveled, has been that one simple fact.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about Venn diagrams on this program all the time. Like I've traveled all over the place, and I'm like, look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how different we might appear. There is a Venn diagram into which there is stuff that we have in common. And if you start there, it's so much easier to then not tolerate other people, but to actually be excited and celebrate the differences, because you begin in this place of like, oh, yeah, we do this, right? And then all the other things that are different illuminate things, right? They aren't scary. It's like, oh God, this is amazing. That to me is what's, I don't know about you, but it's, for me, that's the great thing about traveling. Like I rarely visit the like tourist places when I travel. Like I find little cafes and places where like regular people go and just sort of post up there for a while. Like, what do you do?
Oh, I try to do the same. Often when I travel, it's the experience that I want is what life is like as a local. So we'll try to live like locals. So that comes with a certain responsibility, understanding their customs, understanding what you do and don't do, but also recognizing that we are visitors in their homes. Yeah. So, respecting everything, and also knowing that as much as we are trying to act like one of them and experience their homes as if we were one of them, we are not. We are visitors, and really just acknowledging that reality.
Yeah, I mean, like, don't wear it like a costume. That's what I always tell people. I show up looking like this, like the hillbilly that I am. I'll go anywhere and I'll absolutely do anything, but at no point am I going to think I'm familiar with that, right? Like, it's always a sense of like, or revere it in a way that like, puts them on a pedestal, like, oh God, this is a great life. I'm like, nah, I bet your life is a lot like mine. Like, there's some good shit and some bad shit. Like, it's that sort of honesty of travel, I feel like, is really important. And people that do it a lot, I think, probably get that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I certainly think that's one of the benefits of traveling is just understanding our role in the world and our place in it, and being able to be empathetic towards other communities and be respectful to them, and also just acknowledging the fact that we are all human, but we also are visitors on their land, and I think that's a big part of it.
So here's where I'm going to bring this all back around to the book, because I think one of the things that is interesting about writers, and this is a premise that I've had forever, is that I feel like writers always sit on the outside of things. Like, we're sort of looking and observing and trying to understand, like, what is this thing? Why does this thing happen? Questions pop up, and then you want to spend time with them. And that means observing and being empathetic and like inhabiting worlds, but also understanding you're not part of that. So have you thought about the fact that like all of the new things we talked about have all been about empathy, have been about traveling, about seeing other things? Like, do you see that as part of your writing life?
Oh, 100%. And I've always said that, I view storytelling and stories as a means to, I guess, tap into our own empathy. Yeah. To be able to step into someone else's shoes and see the world from their eyes. And that's what I try to achieve through my writing, is to be able to give people a chance to do that.
So The Rebellious Tide is out now, right? This is your latest book. And I'm always interested in what spurred the question that made you want to spend time, because this is just sort of reading about the book, right? Like, it has some heavy themes, and anger and things like that. So you're going to spend 18 months of your life with it. What was it that sort of made you say like, oh, this is the world I want to inhabit?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It kind of goes back to my time traveling, because a part of that 4-year period in which all I was doing was traveling the world, there was 1 year in which I spent living on a ship. So I was living and working on board a cruise ship, and the Rebellious Tide.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was a cruise ship, and the Rebellious Tide is set on a ship. It's set on, well, they say in the book that cruise ship is a dirty word. It's a luxury liner, but essentially it's a cruise ship with a superiority complex. And so it started with the setting. And the reason that I thought it was such an interesting setting for a novel is because, based on my experience living on a ship, everything that you see on a ship, you also see on land and vice versa. So all the good, the bad, the ugly that you see in our world and our day-to-day lives, you find on a ship. You know, you have strict social hierarchies, you have polarization between those with and without power. So those were the themes that I really wanted to explore with this novel. And I thought a ship was the perfect way of bringing that to life in confined, intense, close quarters, right?
It's fun, you know. I'm a writer, and I tell people like I don't ever look at things that people have written and go, well, what part of that's you and what part of it's not. I always tell people like none of it's any of them. Like it's a question or an idea or a thought that may have come from a life, but everything that happens after that is you're sort of not in control of it. Like the thing, you know, you're in control of it a little bit, but like the people and the characters and the setting will oftentimes take on its own thing. But I'm always interested in what drives people to the question. So when you were on, like, how long were you on the ship?
A year.
So a quarter of the time you were there. The whole of all the travel time of the time that you were like there, because I would have to think being, I don't know, this could be completely wrong, being confined, like you said, like you can't get off. I mean, you can, but it's a one-way trip if you get off. How much did that make you feel? How much did you feel like an outsider there? Like, oh my God, I've walked into this thing that exists, right? That has a hierarchy and have people that are there all the time. And I really am just like fascinated by seeing how all this works.
That's funny because everything was so foreign. The environment, how things are set up, it's essentially its own society. But I came on board and I automatically felt at home. It was
really?
Yeah, like it's a really interesting thing in that, you know, I was there when I was very young and I was in many ways lost, you know, adrift figuratively and then literally in life.
Yeah.
And I just had to throw that out
there.
Yeah. And so I was looking for something, you know, and I think this is often a driving force with a lot of people who travel and make it a priority to travel, is this search for something. Often you're searching for something that you don't even know, right? And for me at the time, I didn't really know what that was. So when I came on board, I thought I'd found it. Just, you know, people who were so different from the people that I was used to encountering back home. You know, there's such a diversity of people in terms of ethnicity and religion and gender identity and sexual identity. And it was really just my idea of the world really expanded just by virtue of being there, because there were so many different people from so many different backgrounds, you know, living on board in this really confined environment. So for me, like, yes, like I very much felt like an outsider because it was a very foreign environment to me. But in a lot of ways, I also felt at home because, you know, this is what I was searching for, I think, is a more expanse access, I guess, to humanity and the world.
Did there come a point during that? Because I found this during my travels, and maybe not, maybe you'll have something different, that you sort of have that immediate bond, right? Of like, oh God, I've been looking for this my whole life. But then there also comes this other line of demarcation where you're like, nope, like this is not it.
Yeah, I know. I definitely see what you're saying. Definitely with the bonding, because I've mentioned this before. I've likened life on a ship to be similar to The Bachelor, you know, that TV series.
I am familiar.
In which just emotions are high. It's easy to watch The Bachelor and think, how is this possible? How are people like falling in love, and how are emotions running so freely? And it is so intense because it's the close quarters, like you're living in this little bubble.
It's camp. It's any kid who's ever gone to camp, that's what happens for the 2 weeks. Right?
Exactly. and I think a lot of that happens on board a ship too. I can kind of relate to the people on The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, because life on a ship, you're living and working and playing with all the same people. So one might think that one would get I guess, annoyed or bored of these people, but you don't. You create these unbreakable bonds. It's a family of sorts, because you're all experiencing this together, and it's so much more intense because of that too.
I am convinced the people that travel, I mean, you said they're searching for something, and I think the opposite of that. I mean, I think they are searching for something, but they're also running from something, right? Like, you get to, and again, this is, I know, sort of thematically part of what the book is about, but you also get to pick and choose the thing in the, you are choosing it in a way that you don't get to do it. I'm from a very small town, so like that was the family, those were the friends, that was the world. And when I started traveling Europe, I'm like, I can go and do whatever I want to do, and if I don't like this thing, I can just leave with no consequence. Did you have that kind of experience?
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. And I think often when you're leaving what you're used to, what you find ordinary, it's a matter of searching for something that you don't currently have access to, or isn't currently common in your current home. So in a way, it is a bit of push and pull. You're running away from something with the goal of trying to find it elsewhere.
Or whatever that it is elsewhere. That you, like you said, that you probably don't even know. It's a feeling, almost like a feeling that you're searching for. Like, and that's why I think those bonds happen so quickly. Like if you're in a hostel and you meet other people, like for me, it's like if I meet Australians, I'm like, well, this is going to be the best time of my life, because they know how to travel, right? You just sort of are like, oh, this is going to be fun. And that's the feeling that you're looking for, is like, or I was like, okay, this is going to be okay. And we're going to, and then everybody goes their separate ways, and you sort of never see them again. And you have that moment of like, did that really just fucking happen?
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Exactly.
So tell me the book, give me the synopsis, because I was reading about it and looking at it, and I'm like, oh, this is this is not a beach read.
No, one might think it could be, because, it is set on a ship and it takes place in the Mediterranean. But The Rebellious Tide is about a complicated young man named Sebastian. He goes on a quest to find the father he's never known when his mother dies. He blames his father for all the terrible things that happen in his life and his mother. And he blames them for abandoning them. So his quest takes him to a ship on the Mediterranean, where he discovers his father is a commanding officer, and he joins the ship posing as a member of the staff and crew to essentially stalk his father and try to find answers to the questions he's never found answers to. And he realizes that the truth is far more complicated than he had imagined it to be. So essentially, it's a story about blame and anger and belonging, all set on the Mediterranean Sea.
And also, for anybody who's ever, I have a complicated relationship with my family, and like, this is a thing, right? Like, I think most adults, you reach a certain age, and the thing you thought as a child is not the thing you now think as an adult, in as relation to the people that raised you, or that sort of group of people. It's very unsettling.
Oh, it can be. Yeah, it can be very jarring. You grow up thinking that you understand the world and you understand what reality is, and it's often not that simple. That's actually something that's really integral to this story, because Sebastian very much has this virtuous idea of what is right and what is wrong, and it's very black and white, it's very binary, and he soon learns that life in the world just isn't as simple as we sometimes wish it were.
Yeah, binary, as it turns out, outside of a computer, is almost never the answer.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot from between this end and that end, right? There's a lot of gray, a lot of murkiness.
And it gets back to the Venn diagram, right? Like, I think that, I think that's the reason I talk about it so much, is that I'm like, I feel like I think we humans in general, I'm going to generalize 8 billion people, that we typically, the reason that binary stuff becomes so important is it's either a 0 or a 1 is because we don't spend time looking at the Venn diagram. We look at the things that are ours and not that are like individually and not collectively. Like you and I don't meet and go, hey man, like what do we have in common? Right? Like it feels, for whatever reason, adversarial. And when you find those people where you're like, oh God, this was great. And you have that connection comes from that ground. And then whatever's not a 0 or 1, you're like, fuck, cool. What's that? Like, it's a really different sort of experience.
Yeah, I think people can just listen more, if every time we had a conversation, instead of thinking about our point of view and our response, if we were to just focus on listening and understanding what the other person was saying and where they're coming from, we'd be much better off as a civilization, as a species.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we're making progress in that way.
I mean, like don't get your hopes too high on that one. But that was why I want, and then we'll get out of here. But that was why I was interested in what you guys were doing. And again, just because of my experience in Berkeley, and I tell people that, and I'm sure you have the same experience when you tell folks, they're like, wait, why? And I'm like, I mean, because humanity is important to foster in everybody. Like I think the biggest tragedy for anybody is to not feel their humanity is seen and allowed to be. Like, I don't know a greater injustice or a greater thing that would be destructive than that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, and I'm a very progressive, liberal-minded person, but regardless of people's viewpoints on politics or whatever else the issues, there are very few issues where there is a solid right and a solid wrong. Right. It's just like a million different opinions and a million different perspectives, and the truth, I think, is often somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think if we try to understand the other side a bit more, and also recognizing that it's not always just two different sides, but a lot of different
again,
it's a whole spectrum of perspectives. Exactly. We'd be better off.
You'll be interested in this, and I'll send this to you after the show. I've interviewed a series of scientists who study the psychological reasons that people deny science. And it's not about politics. It's not about it talks about like, look, when you begin asking them these kinds of questions, what you don't hear is like, what you hear is, I'm afraid of, this concerns me, I don't understand it becomes these series of things that all of us are like, oh yeah, no, I totally understand that. It may come out because you don't have the words or the ability or whatever to process and speak it in a way that somebody else hears it. But the things that are underneath that are not really that hard to go, oh yeah, no, I fucking get that. And so maybe instead of yelling at them, you find empathetic ways to say, well, let's talk through your fear. Like, let's figure out how that works.
Yeah, exactly. Like going one layer deeper, right? It's easy to argue about an issue, but it's much harder to understand where the argument's coming from. Yeah. And it's often, like you said, driven by fears, driven by their own personal anxieties about certain things. Yeah. It's often what it comes down to, right? Yeah. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. We're all fearful of certain things, right?
Yeah. Who's not? Yeah. So anytime I tell my therapist, like, I feel this way, she's like, you don't, that's a reaction. Let's talk about where the feeling is. And I'm like, God damn it.
I like that.
Yeah, he's really good. Well, this has been fantastic. I was really excited to talk to you just because of what the book was about. And as I sort of saw the stuff you did, I'm like, you are fascinating. I could do this all day. The Rebellious Tide out now, and it's available in the US too, right?
It is, yeah. It came out in Canada last month, but is now available in the US and the UK and beyond. You can find it at your favorite bookseller.
Yes, and I always encourage people to go to a bookshop or independent and local bookstores if they can. Yes. We keep them in business.
Agreed.
Well, you have a great day. This has been fantastic, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks for having me.
That was Eddy Boudel Tan, whose book, The Rebellious Tide, is out right now. What a fabulous guy. I cannot wait to read the book. It sounds fascinating, and he's such a kind, smart person. So I really hope you enjoyed the interview. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. Do us those two things we talked about. If you like what you heard, tell your friends about us. That's the surest way to spread the word about what we're doing at the Jam. Also, you can leave us a review. If you use Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a star and a written review. If you're watching us or if you're listening and not using an Apple product, you can head on over to the Facebook page and leave us a review there. While you're at it, don't forget to check out all of the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship Mother May I Sleep With podcast with host and our Solid Listen podcast queen, Molly McAleer. Don't forget, these video podcasts, they come out about every Monday and Friday. There's a couple places you can find them. The Solid Listen Network YouTube channel over at thewritersjam.com, or you can catch the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. Speaking of podcasts, the Downtown Writers Jam comes out every Wednesday. So get yourself subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts and don't miss anything that we're doing. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram at The Writers Jam. Until the next time, I will see you around the internet.